the level playing field assumption is that it casually presumes that we're already fully conscious and complete just the way we are. Whole units, so to speak. The truth is, we're still fractions, which, though not always equal to each other, are still equal in as much as they add up to one, i.e. universe, and can't exist outside of it. Cosmology-wise, this realization is quite advanced, considering that the West, until 1545, assumed only men had human souls, and even the East assumed, until quite recently in human history, that only men became enlightened. Much of the issue here is individuality, which etymologically implies that our personal identity has some undivided state of being. But is that really the case? Each of us has, at the very least, a conscious and subconscious mind, which implies division of our psyche by at least two. At least partial proof here is our dreams, which, despite the apparent realness of our waking existence, insert themselves into our lives anyway. If our waking lives were 100% real and 100% complete, it is quite safe to say that dreams would never occur in the first place. In my experience, it does no good to dismiss dreams as completely real or completely unreal. Rather, they vibrate constantly between something and nothing. Conclusions drawn thus far. Our conscious minds and conscious lives are not whole units, but fractions. I have never once been an individual, and neither have you. Thus, we can no more respect each other's individuality than we can consider each other fully alive, when in all honesty, some fraction of each of us has still not fully lived. Still, some people continue to devote their whole energy to only the conscious waking fraction of their lives. Jung obviously addressed these issues in much more detail than I have, which greatly explains why he put individuality aside in favor of individuation, thus making ourself a work in progress rather than a finished product. To be sure, there is something unique and irreplaceable about the moment-to-moment experience of each of us. I might be able to put myself in your shoes, but not while you're wearing them. But to equate this intimate here-and-now experience with individuality would be like assuming that everything making up your shoes was only made by you, or that your shoes will never change from what they are. These highly personal, irreplaceable moments of our experience do have a unique texture. But life proves over and over again that texture cannot exist outside the broader pattern of universe. Thus, the unique texture of each person's life is still only a fraction, not a whole unit. Implications here, of course. Any discussion of fractions and whole units in any context ultimately reflects how we evaluate ourselves, each other, and all other sensory mental phenomena around us. Indeed, this evaluation starts the very moment we count something as one, that is, as a single whole unit. Such measuring out of whole units is inevitable, not only with numerical systems, but also with any language that uses them. Like many Western languages, English rigorously distinguishes between singular and plural terms. However, many Asian languages like Japanese don't use article adjectives, and to my knowledge, many ancient tribal languages also deprioritize singular plural distinctions or don't verbalize them at all. Obviously, non-Western and tribal cultures can distinguish between one and more than one just as well as you and I can, but this distinction was first determined moment by moment through context, not necessarily through their language. Such context dependency also indicates to me that many non-Western and tribal languages were meant, first and foremost, to be spoken, and only when non-verbal information was insufficient. The immense complexity of the Chinese and Japanese writing systems, for example, thus belies how structurally simple their spoken languages actually are. And their writing systems possibly reflect the expansion of their civilizations and the ensuing increased scarcity of face-to-face contact with each other. Writing systems of any kind have thus been a way of compensating for distance, contextualizing in the absence of actual context. Consider both those terms, contextualization and context. Our increasingly virtualized society makes them seem identical, but they can never be more than asymptotically close to each other. Contextualization, then, is really only a fraction at most of actual context. It is again important to emphasize that living language is not purely mental, but draws on all five physical senses, as well as all conscious and subconscious levels of our mind. Poets may best realize this, but with time, all of us do too. Computers, by contrast, only deal in linguistic signs, which again carry at most only 2/3 the significance of actual words. Put another way, computers treat each linguistic sign as a whole unit of meaning, irrespective of context, while you and I, in the moment-to-moment activity of our daily lives, can perceive each linguistic sign more easily for what it actually is, a mere fraction of meaning, becoming more complete with actual context. Put one more way, linguistic signs were devised to reflect only the conscious part of our experience, and computers now, not knowing any better, reflect this conscious part of our experience back to us as our whole experience, sometimes across thousands of miles of distance. Significant moment-to-moment changes in our minds thus run the risk of being at best only belatedly updated. Virtualization, by mimicking three-dimensional reality in the form of two-dimensional images and mimicking words in the form of linguistic signs, frequently tempts us into dividing truth by at least two. The highly sequential nature of all language also perpetuates such divisions. Carbondale and Illinois, as signs written one after the other, can seem like two separate things to the unwary. No amount of text and images can convey the actual extent to which these two concepts overlap and interpenetrate each other. Such can only be done by the multidimensional aspect of our own minds, an aspect well needed in order for text or images to have any instructive value to us. Such signs and images, as mere fractions of actual universe, can thus add nothing to it. Consequently, the increased virtualization of our experience fools the unwary part of our minds into thinking we're practicing addition, when we may really only be practicing division. Given my efforts to provoke some thinking here, it might be worthwhile to give my tentative sense of what a thought is, as follows. A thought is the shrinking of all space-filling superconscious awareness down to a finite conscious space, thus sensing a mere fraction of universe as universe itself. Ultimately, the dimension of thoughts has to change. Verbalizing and quantifying is not enough. So let's learn to feel words and numbers as shapes, moving shapes, then compare notes with each other. All this brings to mind a Hindu story about how the god Brahma created Maya, the deity of illusion who proceeded to cut Brahma into numerous pieces, then placed a piece of him into each and every human being. Brahma has thus been trying to piece himself back together again through each and every one of us ever since. Is this what each of us, as fractions of one, is really doing right now? What if the world game were really a puzzle instead, only complete with each of us? Are you and I here together or separately? If your mind wavers even the least bit at the answer to that question, then you now have a first-hand sense of why globalization is not really global and still remains no synonym for actual lasting togetherness. The truth is that wavering of your mind is exactly what it currently needs to do, as your sense of my identity and your own incrementally changes. Is this what evolution feels like from moment to moment?